Hello, welcome to the 81st episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. And I'm doing a sub-series on the soap opera of President Trump. And I'll follow him week by week, but this will be the last week that I follow him. Next week, I'm going to put all these events in a bigger picture theoretically with trying to understand where are we in world history, what are the theoretical issues involved in terms of economic theory, political theory, social theory, cultural theory, where are we heading towards in the coming decades? But I'll take that from a theoretical point of view. So this is the last sub-series of the Trump analysis. I think the picture becomes pretty clear of what kind of government we have in the United States. So this week I'll talk about three issues: Iran-US talk, descent in the Israeli army, and tariff war in China. What a difference in reporting. The Fox News report was that Trump teams hold constructive face-to-face nuclear talks with Iran. And Trump demanded face-to-face meetings, and he got it. The rest of the world saw what's going on. There were indirect talks, and they were sitting in different rooms, and the Omani officials were going back and forth. And basically, Iran is just playing with Trump. You want a face-to-face meeting? No, we'll give you a meeting, but not face-to-face. You threat with war, let's discuss, and we'll show the world that we are the ones who are not seeking war, although we are ready for it. And what it shows you basically is that there is a movement going on within the Trump administration and its backers to stay away of the big talk of Trump. Trump comes with big talk. I'm going to solve the Ukraine issue in 24 hours. We are now in April. He came to power in office officially in January, and the 24 hours are very long. He couldn't get an end to the war. And the terms on which this war will ended will be on Russian terms, not on Trump's terms. And then the Gaza war. He said, I'll end the war, I'll bring on the hostage, I'll destroy Hamas. Nothing of that has happened. There was a ceasefire, and the Israelis broke it, and Trump could do nothing against it. And now the big talk, we're going to bomb Iran. And if they don't come to the table and make a deal with me on my terms. And the Iranians are very calm and say, well, let's talk, yes, but not face to face. Let's test the waters to see how serious we are in making a deal, and we have our demands. But basically, we are ready for war. So we'll see how this goes, but I think where initially I thought, Trump is going to war, I think that Trump is backing off. And you see talks now on that there will be a war, possibly with Iran, but it will be led by Israel, not the United States. They talk about Israel-led war. Well, if Israel leading the war, it goes nowhere. You need the United States, not in support, but in leading the war. So we'll have to see. Then, when I talk coming weeks about how empires are, dying, and one of the things is that the internal composition of a country or empire, that is eroding, and we see that in Israel. There are reports in the Israeli press, I follow Jerusalem Post and Haaretz, about dissent in the Israeli occupation forces, and especially protests by reverse officers of the 8,200 Intel Unit, the Central Collection of Intelligence Corps. These are active personnel, retired officers calling on the Israeli government to recover the captives and end the war. And so these people collect information. They know what's going on in Gaza, in the West Bank, and they see no end to the war. They don't see Hamas, bogging down. They don't see that the resistance is destroyed. So they call for an end to the war. And the Israeli army says it will expel hundreds of them who signed this advertisement for an end to the war. And this is how the internal fabric, social fabric and political fabric is eroding, which is a sign of their final demise. And then the tariff things, Trump called it April 2, the Liberation Day, signed an executive order imposing 10% tariff, and then higher tariffs up to 50%. But suddenly, when it went into effect, he backed down and suspended all tariffs for 90 days, except the 10%. And then if you see what the background of this is the trade deficit of the US. In 1971, they had 1.3 billion trade deficit, meaning that they import more from they import more than they export. Until 1971, it was the reverse. That trend for the past, let's say, 50 years has been growing. The trade deficit has ballooned into 150 billion in 1987, and it went to, basically 760 billion in 2008, 1.18 trillion during the Biden administration. So you see that the trade deficit, meaning you import more than you export, and the main trading partners are China and Mexico, by the way, with 20,000 US companies in Mexico that produce in Mexico, exported to the United States. So what you see that the economic problems of the US is that the US consumes more than it produces, and that drives the import. There's a decline in manufacturing. The US was a net oil importer until the 2010 shale boom, and the strong dollar made export more expensive. As I mentioned, Mexico is a big trading partner with the American companies in Mexico, and now the tariffs obviously makes the import from Mexico of American produced goods more expensive. And the same with China. Recently, the Chinese published a white paper on US-China trade. And they said that that the US imported far more from China than China imported from Europe. 450 billion is imported by the US from China, and 145 that China imports from the US. And one of the biggest industries that China takes its products from is the US agriculture, soybeans, cotton. And what happens now, that when China retaliates with the tariffs, imposing its own tariffs, the US exporters get into problem. And this white paper now says what the China-US relation meant for the American companies. It says these American companies have boosted their international competitiveness by integrating the strength of resources from both countries. Apple designs and develops mobile phones in the US, assembles and manufactures them in China, and sells them globally. Tesla has established wholly owned mega factories in China, expanding production capacities and exporting to global markets. So, if now the trade between China and US is hampered, then it will affect the US companies. And then there's also the effect for the consumers. The standard of living and the inflation will become higher in the US. And one important thing is that a lot of the US companies, for example, take steel. The steel, if there are far more companies using steel in the US than producing steel. So what happens if those companies that use steels have to buy their steel from outside? The steel becomes more expensive. Then these companies will end up in trouble. So there are structural problems in the US economies, and you can't fight these problems with accidental measures, and we'll see more of this. I'll give a theoretical analysis next week of how to look at all these developments. Meanwhile, if you want to support this channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, families, and colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe and get involved in the discussion group. And if you want to make a donation, look at samdahir.com how to do that. Well, thank you very much, and hope to see you next week.